You are lying awake at 2 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, and for a moment a thought appears that you immediately try to push away, not because it is offensive, not because it is evil, not even because it is difficult. You push it away because it feels dangerous. The strange thing is that nobody else can see the battle taking place. From the outside, everything looks normal. You still go to work. You still speak to friends. You still follow routines that have existed for years. Yet somewhere deep inside your mind, a question has appeared that refuses to disappear. The more you try to silence it, the louder it becomes. The question is not whether you are a good person. It is not whether you have made mistakes. It is not even whether life is fair. It is something far more uncomfortable. It is the realization that certainty might not be as solid as you once believed. Most people assume doubt begins when belief becomes weak. But what if doubt often begins when belief becomes strong enough to be examined honestly? Think about that for a moment. The people who never question anything are not necessarily the most convinced. Sometimes they are simply the most afraid of discovering where a question might lead. You have probably experienced this in some area of life. A relationship that looked perfect until one conversation exposed cracks that had always been there. A career that seemed meaningful until one afternoon you realized you were running on autopilot. A dream you pursued for years before suddenly asking yourself whether it was ever truly yours. Human beings are experts at living inside assumptions without noticing them. We build entire identities around ideas we rarely inspect. Then one day something happens. A conversation, a tragedy, a coincidence, a loss, a moment of silence. And suddenly the structure that felt permanent no longer feels as stable as it once did. The uncomfortable reality is that most of us spend much of our lives searching for certainty while living in a universe filled with uncertainty. We want clear answers to questions that may not have clear answers. We want guarantees about existence, purpose, suffering, morality, and what happens beyond the limits of our understanding. Yet the deeper we look, the more mysterious reality often becomes. What makes this especially difficult is that uncertainty feels emotionally threatening. The human brain dislikes open loops. It dislikes ambiguity. It dislikes unresolved tension. We crave conclusions because conclusions create psychological relief. That is why many people feel drawn toward explanations that provide order. Order calms anxiety. Order reduces fear. Order transforms chaos into something manageable. But there is another possibility that few people talk about. What if the desire for certainty itself sometimes prevents us from seeing clearly? What if some questions remain powerful precisely because they resist simple answers? Imagine two people standing beneath the same night sky. One sees evidence of meaning everywhere. The other sees randomness. Both are looking at the same stars. Both are using the same eyes. Yet their interpretations are completely different. Why? Because human beings do not simply observe reality. We interpret it. We filter it through memories, emotions, experiences, hopes, fears, culture, family, and personal history. The same event can inspire faith in one person and doubt in another. The same tragedy can deepen conviction in one individual and destroy it in someone else. This raises an uncomfortable possibility. How much of what we believe comes from evidence, and how much comes from the stories we tell ourselves about that evidence? Before you answer too quickly, consider how often intelligent people reach completely opposite conclusions while examining the same facts. This happens in science. It happens in politics. It happens in relationships. It happens in philosophy. Human beings are not merely reasoning creatures. We are meaning-making creatures. We construct narratives that help us navigate existence. And those narratives become deeply personal because they are connected to identity. Challenging a belief often feels like challenging the self. That is why conversations about ultimate questions can become emotional so quickly. They are rarely just intellectual discussions. They are discussions about belonging, purpose, mortality, hope, fear, and the deepest parts of human experience. If you have ever wrestled with a question that felt impossible to ignore, leave a comment and share what it was. Not because there is necessarily a perfect answer waiting, but because many people quietly carry questions they believe they are alone in asking. The truth is that uncertainty is far more universal than most people admit. Everyone experiences it. Some simply become better at hiding it. Think back to childhood. There was probably a time when the world seemed simpler. Answers appeared clearer. Authority figures appeared more confident. Reality felt more organized. Then life happened. Contradictions appeared. Different perspectives emerged. Complexity replaced simplicity. You discovered that intelligent people disagree about profound questions. You discovered that certainty is often easier to claim than to justify. You discovered that reality refuses to fit neatly inside the categories we create. And perhaps that is where the real tension begins. Not in the question itself, but in the realization that no human being stands outside the limitations of being human. Every perspective has blind spots. Every worldview leaves some questions unresolved. Every explanation reaches a point where mystery begins. Some people find that realization terrifying. Others find it liberating, but almost nobody finds it comfortable. Because comfort depends on predictability, and mystery refuses to be predictable. The deeper you think about existence, the stranger it becomes. Why is there something rather than nothing? Why does consciousness exist? Why do humans long for meaning? Why does beauty affect us so deeply? Why does suffering feel so significant? Why does love matter so much if everything is ultimately temporary? These questions have haunted humanity for thousands of years. Entire civilizations have been built around attempts to answer them. Yet despite all our knowledge, they remain astonishingly difficult. Perhaps the most unsettling realization is that some questions may reveal more about us than about the universe itself. The answers we find compelling often expose our deepest desires and fears. We see what resonates with us emotionally. We gravitate toward narratives that satisfy psychological needs. We interpret uncertainty through the lens of personal experience. And maybe that is why these conversations never truly end. Because beneath every argument lies a human being trying to make sense of existence, trying to understand suffering, trying to understand purpose, trying to understand themselves. The question that seems impossible to answer may not be important because of the answer it produces. It may be important because of what happens to us when we seriously engage with it. Because the moment we stop repeating familiar conclusions and start confronting uncertainty honestly, something changes. We begin to see how fragile certainty can be. We begin to notice how much of our identity is tied to ideas we rarely examine. We begin to recognize the difference between knowing and assuming, and once that process begins, it becomes very difficult to return to the comfort of unquestioned conclusions. The reason this matters is not because questioning guarantees truth. It does not. Questioning can lead to mistakes. It can lead to confusion. It can lead to dead ends. But refusing to question carries risks as well. It can preserve illusions. It can protect assumptions. It can create confidence without understanding. Somewhere between blind certainty and endless skepticism lies a difficult path. A path that requires humility. A path that requires courage. A path that requires accepting that some of the most important questions in life may never provide the kind of certainty we desperately want. And that realization leads to an even deeper tension that most people spend their lives avoiding. Because once you see it, it becomes impossible to completely forget. There is a moment that happens to almost everyone, although many people never talk about it openly. It often arrives quietly, not during a debate, not during a crisis, not while reading a book or listening to an argument. It arrives in silence, maybe while driving alone at night, maybe while sitting beside someone you love, maybe during a funeral, maybe after achieving something you spent years chasing. Suddenly you realize that the question underneath all the other questions is not what is true. It is why truth matters so much to you in the first place. That sounds simple until you sit with it long enough. Human beings do not merely seek information. We seek meaning. We want our lives to fit inside a story that feels significant. We want our suffering to mean something. We want our sacrifices to matter. We want our losses to have purpose. We want our existence to connect to something larger than temporary experiences and passing moments. This desire is so powerful that it influences nearly every decision we make. Think about how often people endure incredible hardship for things they believe are meaningful. Parents sacrifice for children. Athletes sacrifice for achievement. Artists sacrifice for expression. Scientists sacrifice for discovery. Throughout history, people have sacrificed comfort, safety, wealth, and even life itself for ideas they believed mattered. Meaning possesses extraordinary power because meaning transforms suffering. Pain without purpose feels unbearable. Pain connected to purpose becomes something people willingly endure. This is why one of the most difficult experiences a person can face is not necessarily suffering itself, it is meaningless suffering. It is looking at hardship and finding no explanation that satisfies the heart. It is staring at loss and feeling that nothing about it makes sense. It is experiencing tragedy and discovering that answers which once felt comforting suddenly feel incomplete. Many people spend years pretending they are searching for answers when what they are actually searching for is reassurance. There is nothing shameful about that. Reassurance is deeply human. We all want reasons to believe that everything will somehow be okay. We all want confidence that our struggles are not pointless. We all want to believe that the story of our lives matters. Yet sometimes reality confronts us with experiences that refuse easy explanations. A child asks a question nobody can answer. A loved one dies unexpectedly. A person prays for years and receives silence. Another person never asks for anything and seems blessed with extraordinary fortune. One individual dedicates their life to kindness and suffers greatly. Another behaves selfishly and prospers. These observations are not arguments for any conclusion. They are simply experiences that have troubled human beings for generations. The deeper issue is what happens inside us when we encounter contradictions between what we expect and what we experience. Most people imagine that belief systems are primarily intellectual structures. In reality, they are often emotional structures as well. They help organize reality. They help reduce uncertainty. They help create stability in a world filled with unpredictability. When those structures are challenged, the emotional impact can be profound. It can feel less like changing an opinion and more like losing a home. This is why some of the most intense struggles are invisible. A person may continue outward routines while privately wrestling with questions they have never voiced. They may smile during conversations while carrying doubts that keep them awake at night. They may appear confident while feeling trapped between competing possibilities. One side of them wants certainty. Another side wants honesty. One side wants answers. Another side fears that easy answers might be incomplete, and so the internal conflict grows. The uncomfortable truth is that many people do not fear being wrong nearly as much as they fear uncertainty. Being wrong at least provides closure. Uncertainty provides none. Uncertainty leaves the story unfinished. It leaves open possibilities that the mind desperately wants to close. Yet there is something fascinating about individuals who learn to live with uncertainty without becoming cynical. They recognize the limits of their knowledge without abandoning curiosity. They acknowledge mystery without surrendering to despair. They continue asking questions even when answers remain elusive. Perhaps that is a kind of courage rarely discussed. Not the courage to defend a position, not the courage to win an argument, but the courage to remain intellectually honest when certainty would feel more comfortable. Somewhere along the way, many people begin to realize that the deepest questions are not merely about the universe, they are about themselves. Why do certain explanations attract them more than others? Why do some possibilities feel emotionally satisfying while others feel threatening? Why do particular answers create peace while others create anxiety? These questions reveal something important. Human beings do not approach reality as neutral observers. We arrive carrying desires, fears, hopes, wounds, expectations, and personal histories. Imagine two people who experience the exact same event. One sees evidence of purpose, the other sees evidence of randomness. The event itself has not changed. The interpretation has. This does not necessarily mean either person is dishonest. It simply means that perception is complicated. We are influenced by factors we barely understand. Memory shapes interpretation, emotion shapes interpretation, identity shapes interpretation. Even our deepest convictions are often connected to experiences that occurred long before we consciously examine them. If you have ever found yourself caught between what you want to believe and what you honestly think, share your perspective below. That conflict is more common than most people realize, and many people carry it in silence. What makes the struggle so powerful is that it touches something fundamental about the human condition. We are finite creatures asking infinite questions. We possess remarkable intelligence, yet we exist within limitations we cannot escape. We can study galaxies billions of light years away, yet we cannot fully understand our own consciousness. We can analyze the chemistry of emotion, yet love still feels mysterious. We can explain many aspects of the physical world, yet questions about meaning remain stubbornly resistant to final answers. Some people interpret this as evidence that ultimate answers exist beyond current understanding. Others interpret it as evidence that certain questions may never be fully resolved. Either way, the mystery remains. And perhaps that mystery explains something important about why these conversations endure across generations. Human beings are not satisfied with survival alone. We crave understanding. We crave significance. We crave narratives that connect our experiences into a coherent whole. But reality often resists neat conclusions. It leaves gaps. It leaves paradoxes. It leaves unanswered questions. The more honestly we engage with those questions, the more we discover how complicated existence truly is. Yet this complexity creates another realization, one that many people spend years avoiding. Because if meaning is so important, and if certainty is so difficult to obtain, then there is a deeper question hiding beneath everything else, a question that reaches beyond philosophy, beyond arguments, beyond intellectual debates, a question about fear itself. About what we are truly afraid of losing, about why certain possibilities feel unbearable to consider, about whether our search for answers is always a search for truth, or whether sometimes it is a search for protection from something much deeper. And once that possibility enters the conversation, the entire discussion changes in a way that most people never expect. The deeper you follow this path, the harder it becomes to ignore a possibility that most people instinctively avoid. Not because it is necessarily true, but because it feels uncomfortably personal. What if the questions that disturb us most are not disturbing because they threaten our conclusions? What if they are disturbing because they expose our fears? Think about the moments when a difficult idea unsettles you. The immediate reaction is often to examine the idea itself. Is it right? Is it wrong? Is it convincing? Is it flawed? But beneath that intellectual process, something emotional is usually happening as well. Certain possibilities frighten us. Certain possibilities comfort us. Certain possibilities challenge the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and what our lives mean. This does not happen only with questions about existence. It happens everywhere. A person remains in an unhealthy relationship because leaving would force them to confront loneliness. Another stays trapped in a career they dislike because uncertainty feels more frightening than dissatisfaction. Someone ignores obvious warning signs because accepting reality would require painful change. Human beings often protect emotional security long before they protect intellectual consistency. We like to imagine that our beliefs are chosen through pure reason, but the truth is usually more complicated. Reason matters, evidence matters, reflection matters. Yet emotion often influences which possibilities we are willing to consider in the first place. This realization becomes especially important when discussing life's biggest questions, because beneath every philosophical debate, there are human beings struggling with mortality, uncertainty, loss, hope, purpose, love, suffering, and fear. The conversation is never only about ideas, it is about what those ideas mean for the people holding them. Imagine someone standing beside the bed of a dying loved one. In that moment, abstract theories suddenly become deeply personal. Questions that once felt distant become urgent. Meaning matters. Hope matters. Purpose matters. The human heart begins searching for something that can withstand the weight of grief. Now imagine someone who has experienced years of unanswered suffering, someone who begged for understanding and found none, someone who searched for meaning and encountered silence. Their emotional journey may lead them toward entirely different conclusions. Neither experience can simply be dismissed. Both reveal something about the complexity of being human. This is why conversations about ultimate questions often become so emotionally charged. They touch wounds, they touch hopes, They touch fears that people rarely discuss openly. Many individuals spend years constructing identities around certainty because certainty feels safe. It provides stability in an unstable world. Yet life has a way of introducing experiences that refuse to fit neatly inside our existing frameworks. A loss that changes everything, a realization that cannot be ignored, a contradiction that refuses to disappear, a question that returns night after night, no matter how many times it is pushed away. And then something strange begins to happen. The person who once believed they were searching for answers discovers they are actually searching for something else entirely. They are searching for the courage to face uncertainty honestly. Because uncertainty itself is not the real enemy. The real enemy is often the fear that uncertainty creates. Fear of being wrong, fear of losing meaning, fear of losing identity, fear of discovering that reality is different from what we expected, fear of standing alone with questions nobody can fully resolve. Yet some of the most transformative moments in life occur precisely when people stop running from those fears. Not because they suddenly find perfect answers, but because they develop a different relationship with uncertainty. Instead of demanding absolute certainty, they begin embracing intellectual humility. Instead of pretending to know everything, they become comfortable admitting what they do not know. Instead of building their identity entirely around conclusions, they build it around honesty, curiosity, and the willingness to keep exploring. This shift changes everything. Because once you stop treating uncertainty as a threat, questions become opportunities rather than dangers. They become invitations to think more deeply, to understand yourself more clearly, to recognize the limitations that every human being shares. The remarkable thing is that this perspective often creates greater compassion as well. When you understand how difficult these questions are, it becomes harder to dismiss people who reach different conclusions. You begin recognizing that behind every worldview is a human story, a collection of experiences, hopes, disappointments, relationships, influences, and struggles. You realize that certainty is rarely as simple as it appears from the outside, and perhaps that is the realization hidden beneath everything we have explored. The most important question may not be whether someone possesses the perfect answer. It may be whether they possess the courage to confront difficult questions without surrendering either honesty or humanity. Because throughout history, countless people have argued over conclusions. Yet the deeper challenge remains the same. How do we live meaningful lives in the presence of uncertainty? How do we pursue truth while acknowledging our limitations? How do we maintain conviction without becoming closed-minded? How do we remain open to possibility without losing ourselves in endless doubt? These questions do not belong to one belief system, one philosophy, one culture, or one generation. They belong to the human condition itself. Every person eventually encounters them. Every person must decide how to respond. Some will choose certainty. Some will choose skepticism. Some will continue searching. Some will accept mystery. But all of them, in one way or another, are responding to the same fundamental reality. Existence is far stranger, deeper, and more complex than any simple explanation can fully capture. Perhaps that is why the questions never disappear, not because humanity has failed to answer them, but because they continue revealing something essential about who we are. They reveal our longing for meaning. They reveal our fear of uncertainty. They reveal our desire for understanding. They reveal our need to belong to a story larger than ourselves. And maybe the most uncomfortable realization of all is that the question you thought this journey was about was never really the central question. The deeper question is whether you are willing to look honestly at your own mind, at your own assumptions, at your own fears, at the hidden motivations behind what feels convincing and what feels threatening. Because the moment you begin doing that, the conversation stops being about winning arguments or defending positions. It becomes a conversation about self-awareness, about humility, about what it means to be human in a reality that continues to surprise us. And perhaps that is why some questions remain powerful even when no final answer arrives. They force us to confront ourselves. They force us to recognize the limits of certainty. They force us to examine what we truly value. And in that process, something unexpected happens. The search itself becomes meaningful. not because it guarantees a destination, but because it transforms the person who is willing to keep walking.